everybody. I'm Dr. James Flowers. Welcome to this edition of Understanding the Human Condition with Dr. James Flowers. I am so excited to have my very good friend, Dr. Gaetano Vaccaro, with us from California. Dr. Gaetano Vaccaro is a licensed clinical psychologist, and he's also a certified sex addiction therapist, otherwise known as a CSAT. Dr. Vaccaro has over 30 years of experience in the addiction and recovery industry as a psychotherapist, executive director, clinical director, and consultant for program design and a workshop facilitator. Dr. Vaccaro is currently the national I'm going to do this again. Dr. Vaccaro is also currently the national wow, that's so weird. Clinical advisor is hard to say. Clinicer, yeah. Dr. Vaccaro is also currently the National Clinical Advisor for Constellation Behavioral Health. He also maintains a private practice in Palm Springs, California, and he has presented, let me say that again. He also maintains a private practice in Palm Springs, California, and he is presented at the 2024 West Coast and Cape Cod Symposia on Addictive Disorders, as well as many other conferences throughout his 30 years of practice. Dr. Vaccaro is a proficient facilitator, and he develops workshops and retreats on personal growth and human development. Welcome, Gaetano Vaccaro.
Thank you, James. Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's so good to see you. How's everything out in California this morning?
It's great. I mean, this is the time of year when everybody shows up here because it's just gorgeous. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it sure has. The weather calmed down and heat-wise in Palm Springs?
It has. Yeah. This morning it was 60 degrees. You can go outside and do a hike, and so
that is so nice. It has not rained in Houston in probably three and a half months, and this morning it's raining.
Wow.
And a little bit cooler, and cool front blew through, so hopefully it'll stick and we'll be like this for a while.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna get out and ride my bike and start hiking and all that stuff you can't really do when it's 110 degrees.
That's exactly right. Which also is a great segue to what you and I decided we wanted to talk about on this podcast, which is you're going out to do some personal wellness, right?
Yeah.
And there's so much talk and there's so much activity around the world of wellness and longevity. And every day I look at my iPhone and the news pops up and there's another program or someone talking about wellness and longevity. And I wanted to ask you, Dr. Vaccaro, or I'm going to call you Gaetano and you call me James on this podcast today. But what is your idea? What do we talk about, and what do we understand that wellness is?
Well, one of the things before we kind of go into wellness, I wanted to just clarify that I think the way for you and I to approach this, James, today is to look at it not really as sort of experts or scientists or even educators, but kind of as explorers. I mean, this is a really big field, very wide, and when we talk about kind of what wellness means to us, but there's so many techniques and innovations that are connected to this idea of wellness and longevity. And what I'd love for us to do is to come up with a couple of actionable steps.
Yep.
And as you and I have discussed, just to begin the exploration into this field and start maybe to collaborate on putting together programs, because I as you know, I've found it to be so important. And I've had several family members who have been struggling with age-related cognitive decline. Luckily, they're a little older than me, so it's not quite that scary. But it's one of those things where it shows up across the board, these sort of markers for what we consider to be illness and age-related illnesses. So I would love for us to just kind of be in the exploration phase of it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Gaetano, here at J. Flowers Health Institute, we have a 360 degrees comprehensive diagnostic evaluation, and we have an amazing wellness program for patients going through recovery from medical issues, mental health, or addiction issues. But what you and I are even exploring more so is even more of a holistic approach to wellness, right? And again, we see these programs kind of popping up, and you and I have been talking recently about kind of age-related decline of our cognitive abilities and our memory, short-term, long-term, things like that. I don't mind saying it all, I'm turning 60 years old. which I thought, oh my, I still can't believe I'm turning 60. But there's moments throughout the day that I can feel myself getting tired or more fatigued. And I think sometimes as the day goes on, my cognitive ability and short-term memory, I can see it and notice it declining. Not significantly at all, but I'll forget my keys, or I'll forget my iPhone on my desk or something like that. And then sometimes even, Gaetano, I can't recall a name immediately for someone that I just met, 30 minutes ago or an hour ago, and I'm like, what was their name? I cannot remember. And that's new.
Yeah, and you're only willing to say your age because you're younger than me, so I'm not going to share that.
I don't believe that for a minute. I don't think I'm older than you. No, I'm younger, you said. Yeah.
Yeah, you're 5 years younger than me.
I cannot believe that. That is amazing. Well, talking about wellness today, I think everybody look at that face. Who would think he's 5 years older than me?
You know what's fascinating too is that the minute you turn like 64 and a half, then all of a sudden Medicare, you get all inundated. I've never felt so old in my life. Because every time I turn around, AARP. I mean, I remember it was a seminal event when I was looking at the, AARP magazine comes to you.
Yep.
And Dylan was on the cover of
Yep.
AARP. And like, oh my God, like when did this happen?
Exactly.
So we are uniformly aging population, our generation.
It's kind of a shock. Yeah. Even yesterday, Terry Garr passed away. And when I heard that news, I was like, oh my gosh, Terry Garr passed away. She was 79 years old. And I remember the 30-year-old, 20-something-year-old, 30-year-old Terry Garr. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, time is going by so fast.
Yeah, Close Encounters was just on the other day, and she was 35 in that movie.
That's so wild.
Yeah. So I think, the part of it that I think is important when we talk about sort of wellness, because you have a lot of wellness programs, and you and I have talked about this, and we agree that wellness is more than just a physical condition. It's so much more than just the absence of illness or disease. Wellness is actually a state of being. And I like to think about the idea of a mindset, because there's kind of a lot of information about mindsets that are kind of in popular psychology. But because I'm also a behaviorist, and also I've done a lot of like body work in my lifetime, massage and Reiki and those kind of things, I think of the mind-body connection. So I really think of it as body mindset.
Yes.
Because the body and the mind are so intricately and reciprocally linked. We know this from things like somatic experiencing and other techniques that we use in psychology. And so it's about how we kind of get our mind and our body to be in alignment with our behavior and our habits. Mm-hmm. So I really think of wellness as a state of being. And then once you've kind of entered into this sort of committed to this state of being, then you start establishing, daily or weekly or even monthly practices of behaviors. And then, of course, you have to strive to be really disciplined and consistent in that practice for it to actually contribute to your quality of life. So it's really this combination that you and I talk about all the time, because we work with people who are struggling with physical, illnesses, chronic pain, mm-hmm. but also people who are struggling with addiction.
That's right.
It's a part of our career in addiction recovery about how to shift a person into a particular mindset in order for the behaviors to really begin to develop. So, my friend Coyote Jackson, who's a counselor and a personal coach, and comes from a Christian and Buddhist background, he's kind of condensed it down into this idea of you have to sort of be something, and then you do something, and then you have something.
Okay.
But you have to start out with being. You have to start out with a state of being. And so if you really want to change your life, you actually have to engage in this mindset of wellness before you engage in the behavior. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, as we know, behaviors dissipate really quickly. I mean, you can start a new habit and it dissipates very quickly, because if the behaviors aren't really motivated by commitment and the desire, and if you haven't linked reward or relief to them in the present, the behaviors dissipate very fast. I mean, it takes 27 to 30 days to establish a new habit. Mm-hmm. If you don't reinforce that, that habit dissipates very quickly. The brain kind of preferences things that we do a lot. And I ask when we go into workshops and do workshops, I always ask people, so what's your daily practice? And sometimes they kind of look at me like dumbfounded, like, am I supposed to have one of those?
Look, what is that?
What is that?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And so then they usually kind of, in early recovery, they kind of look at me and say, well, I don't really have one. I said, oh yeah, you do.
Hmm.
But it could be a default practice by your default mode network. And I said, if you're coming out of an addiction, how many of you were daily users? And they kind of raised their hand. I guess that was your daily practice.
That's right.
And your brain thought that was really important and preferenced it over everything else.
Hmm.
And so now in recovery, we have to figure out what kind of daily practice you're going to do that's about health and wellness. And then they kind of look at me with this, oh, really? I need one. I need one of them.
I have to exercise. I have to eat better. I have to live a life that is very different than what I was living.
Yeah. And I think, just the question I ask for myself is, what is my daily practice?
Hmm.
Like, do I have a sort of a wellness mentality, a wellness mindset? And just sort of examining, is my daily practice reflective of wellness and longevity? Or am I drinking 3 cups of coffee every morning? Am I not exercising? Am I staying up really late watching Netflix and binge watching? Not that any of that's bad, but is it congruent with health and wellness?
That's right. Yeah. And what do you want for yourself? What do you want for your life? Right? Because when you become stagnant and you're binge watching until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and even midnight, and you go to bed and you sleep till 8 or 9, and you just kind of get up and go through your day, and you go to work and you come home and you kind of do repeat, and you're not including that health and wellness, you're not going to feel that health and wellness. You're not going to experience it.
Yeah. And you and I know this as, psychologists and behaviorists, that our brain pays a lot of attention to stuff that we do habitually.
That's exactly right.
The purpose of the brain is to create habits and then make them as automatic as possible, as quickly as possible, so we don't have to think about them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why, in reference to kind of our earlier conversation about memory, is that a lot of our behavior has become operationalized, as procedural inside of our brain, because if we had to think about walking every time we tried to walk,
Mm-hmm.
which people have had to do that you've worked with when they've had injuries or illnesses,
Mm-hmm.
that you've had to restructure that. It's a big task for our brain to learn how to do a new procedure and to create a memory for that. So I always tell people, it's like our brain's trying to make all of our habits automatic as possible. And if we know, brain will never give up a habit that's working. It only replaces it with a habit that works better. And for a really long time, it keeps both neural pathways really open. It's kind of like that thing you get on your computer where it says, do you really want to delete this file?
That's right.
Before it lets go of your addiction or any bad habit, it's like, you sure? Because you did it a lot.
That's right. And you seem to enjoy it.
You seem to really enjoy it. You got kind of a lot out of it.
That's right.
You really think you want to let go of this? Because we don't think you do, but
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So what are you seeing when we're talking about wellness and other programs and in programs that you've worked in and, Moonview, other types of programs. And I think you recently went on a trip and you've been visiting some other programs. What are you seeing in the world of longevity and wellness these days?
I think, it's so fascinating because the approaches are really varied. There are certain things that I think everyone agrees on that are kind of baseline.
Mm-hmm.
I was just watching again the Netflix special on the Blue Zones, How to Live to Be 100, The Secrets of the Blue Zone, which I just love, actually.
Yeah.
Because that study actually was so profound because it was longitudinal. And so because he had gathered data over 15 to 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
really, he had tons of data, and it really was very eye-opening about what do we think the qualities of lifestyle are that promote longevity and wellness, and where are those places? What was interesting about the special and about his study was that a lot of them were very remote places, Okinawa, places that you can't really live in. But
Mm-hmm.
a Blue Zone is in Loma Linda, California.
Right.
That's off the 10 freeway between Palm Springs and LA.
Yeah. You have a lot of
So
vibrating noises there.
yeah, it's not known for its great air quality.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. Yeah.
and yet it's a blue zone.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so part of what was really fascinating was that when he was looking at what were these qualities that people had in those areas. And so I think uniformly, a lot of the programs I'm looking at, they're trying to say, what are the things that are these basic qualities of health and wellness,
Mhm.
and that promote longevity that people can institute easily into their life,
Mhm.
and then how do we expand on that?
Right.
I mean, I love the idea of regenerative medicine. You and I talked a little bit about that.
Mhm.
But it's a very broad field of science and medicine, working on the cellular level to kind of remit certain cellular deficiencies, and also genetics. When we would do genetic testing to see if we're susceptible to certain disorders.
That's right.
Regenerative medicine can be very powerful in looking at that. But you and I know that the power of the mind is really amazing, and that the placebo effect is the most studied effect in medicine because everything is scaled against it in clinical research, and it's real.
It is real. It is real.
That's why I focus on, all the programs that I've seen. The primary focus, and everybody's kind of got consistently about this, is that we have to think about the mindset first.
Mhm.
Because what you think about and your belief and your trust and your faith in a particular regimen, whether it's a medical regimen or not,
Mhm.
is 80% of the effectiveness of the regimen.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've seen that throughout my life. I think if and one of my own personal taglines is, if you see it and you believe it, if you see it in your mind and you believe it and you want it, you can achieve it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can manifest it and you can create it. Sometimes I think that word manifest is overused these days, but I really do believe that we can manifest it. And I believe you're right. I think it's about 80% of the entire process.
Yeah.
That if we believe we are ill and we believe we don't feel good and we maintain, I'm never going to feel like I used to. I'm 60 years old. I'm 40 years old, and I'm not. My back hurts all the time. I can't go out and exercise because it hurts. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. And I remember, it's now 25, 30 years ago, Bernie Siegel wrote the book Love, Medicine, and Miracles. He
Yeah.
was an oncologist. He was kind of on the periphery of his day, talking about how mindset in his era, the frame of mind and how you thought about it, and the placebo effect is being. And he gave several anecdotes in his book about a little girl who was being treated, and they ran out of alpha interferon, and so they put her on this like camphor solution, this
Hmm.
oil of camphor smell, and this other solution, which is basically saline,
Yep.
stand out the treatment. And her body produced alpha interferon. The levels were the same throughout the course of treatment, which is a very complicated
Yes, it is.
chemical compound for our brain to actually create.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but I love the idea of we have to get our mind and our brain
Hmm.
sort of in alignment with what, like you said, with what we really want
Hmm.
and what we're moving towards. And of course, this is the dialectic of our brain, is that it can hold two really conflicting things. Like, I want to be healthy, but I want to eat, pizza,
That's right. Yeah.
you know? And also I have this addiction. I want to be a healthy person, and every other area of my life, I'm trying to be healthy, but, I kind of am addicted to opiates.
Yeah. And another huge one, I think one of the biggest is, I want to be healthy. I want to be in recovery, but it's hard.
It's
And
hard.
and I don't want to, it's just too hard, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people give up at simply saying it's too hard. I
Yeah.
can't run there's no possibility I can run. It's not possible for me to run a marathon. It's too hard to train,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because obviously dopamine is the chemical of motivation. It's not really chemical pleasure.
Yeah.
It's a big difference, because when I say to people, when you need to get motivated to do behavior, like, yeah, but it's not fun. It's like, yeah, dopamine's not the chemical of fun.
Yeah, exactly.
There are other chemicals, endorphins and other, and enkephalins, things like that, that kind of happen, oxytocin, that kind of give you the pleasure part, serotonin. But what happens with sometimes motivation follows behavior, kind of in addiction
Yeah.
recovery, about do it and, kind of just do it or do it anywhere, or act as if, you know, sometimes you just kind of get into your habit pattern and commit to that practice. You get up in the morning, you put on your shoes, you go out running. And then somewhere in the middle of it, you're like, oh yeah, this actually is pretty good.
Yeah.
And we keep thinking that motivation has to precede behavior, and it doesn't.
Right.
Sometimes we do the behavior, and then the motivation is when we start thinking whether we're going to get some kind of reward or relief from that behavior.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I talk to people all the time. I've run 28 marathons, and I was a lifelong runner. I used to be a sprinter, and then I was a long time I ran marathons. And I would talk to other people about training, and they're like, I can't motivate myself to get up, right? I can't motivate. And I said, sometimes you just have to get up and you start running, and there's a window period of time, right? And then all of a sudden the motivation follows it. And then you're going to be motivated once you start seeing the difference in your body and feeling the difference in your brain and in your serotonin and everything else. You're going to be motivated to continue to do that. And people would always come back, the ones that actually did it, and say, I can't believe I hated running, and now I love it.
Yeah. I love the progression of I used to be a sprinter, then I went to be a marathon.
Yeah, right. I was a short.
Yes.
I ran the 200 and 400, and that's all. That's it. And then out of college, I was like, I can run 3 miles. I'll try that.
Yeah.
And then started running longer. But yeah. When I was in high school, my coach would say, you've got to go train today and you're going to run a mile. And I'm like, I am not running a mile. I will never run a mile in my life. And I was hard headed.
Yeah. And I think, what you're saying is so powerful too, because the way the brain and the body works is that, our brain is really looking for kind of two things, either reward, some kind of reinforcement, some reward, or relief.
Yeah.
And it's very basic kind of operant conditioning, and what we try to do is we try to use classical conditioning. We just pair things together so that they kind of happen automatically. Like I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to go swim.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to. I'm just going to kind of do that. The practice helps to create the beingness of it. It helps to reinforce that, yes, I'm a person who swims or I'm a person who runs.
Yeah.
But it's really the mindset. When I think about people, especially kind of people in recovery, it's like, do you have a recovery mindset? Do you think about yourself? Can you envision the future of yourself in recovery? And it's hard because sometimes a person is so caught in the behavior that they really can't even envision what it is. I have a client right now, several clients who are kind of hockey players, which is fascinating because I live in the desert and we have a hockey team.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Right. Yeah.
Ice hockey. Yeah. But what's fascinating is you have these 30-year-old guys who are really super athletes, but it's very hard for them to envision a future beyond hockey.
Yeah.
And at 30, you're old in hockey.
That's right.
So it's kind of like they're up against this thing of how do I reinvent myself? And also when you get an injury, which happens a lot in sports, how do you not focus on, oh my God, I have this problem with my knee, or I have this problem with my ankle. How do you not be problem focused?
It's exactly
where you're always, and because, whatever we focus on expands. So if this as an athlete, if you're focusing on a part of your body that's not functioning really well, and you're focusing on that, you're going to feel it more. It's going to kind of become worse because whatever we focus on expands.
Right. Absolutely. And hold on one second. I lost my train of thought. I'm going to come back to that.
Well, I'm gonna take a moment, just kind of blow my nose.
Yeah. No, what I was saying is I completely agree with you, and I think that motivation again can post. How would I say it? The thought can come first, right? The desire can come first, and the motivation can come second. But I want to go back to something I want to revisit is the blue zone and all of these blue zones around the world, and Loma Linda in particular. What did they find in these blue zones, what were some of the common themes around the world in the blue
So
zones?
great.
Yeah.
It's so great. I mean, it's so elegant the way that he kind of put it together to see what was common, because there were very diverse populations and ethnicities that he was reviewing. But one of the things that he came up with is that every place where there's blue zones, where there's longevity, there are several things that are kind of common that can be replicable, that can be replicated. So one of them is that this idea of moving naturally, this idea that, it's not just exercise specifically, is that people's lifestyles involved a lot of movement. They were walking, they were riding bikes, they were mostly walking. And in some of the blue zones, they were walking up hills, because that's how the towns were, Okinawa and places like Sardinia. That's how the towns were built. They were built on hills. So there was this natural movement throughout their lifespan of moving their body and oxygenating their body. So one common thing was movement. We're human beings, we have to move. The other thing was the eating and diet, that all of the eating and diet in each of these areas included certain types of foods that were very good for the body and did not have a lot of processed food. So it was, the basic thing he said, natural whole foods is really important, but also the quantity of food. Most of the areas that he talked about, they had this mindset of, like in Okinawa, it's this 80%, you stop eating when you're 80% full. It's this idea of moderation in our food consumption, but also mindfulness eating.
Yeah.
Being really aware, and then eating. Another big part was this idea of connection and community connection, which was, he said, probably 80% of longevity has to do with community and connection.
Yeah.
And that if you are disconnected, and we saw this during the pandemic, the more disconnected people were, the more depression we saw, the more anxiety we saw, but also a couple of years later, we saw things like physical illness. Because we were isolated. You're not moving, you're not interacting with people, you're very lonely. So this idea of connection and community was really powerful. That was one of them. And then the last one was the one that I start with, is outlook. Having faith, having purpose, having a sense of why are we doing something. That all of the cultures he reviewed had some kind of a vocabulary in their language for purpose, for having some purpose to your life. And then a lot of them were faith-based communities or intentional communities, where you have this connection with each other and you kind of have the same sort of mindset. That's why I focus on the thing for health and wellness is, what's our mindset around it?
That's right.
Is it too hard? Is it even achievable? So after the study, at the very end of the documentary, he talks about they took all the stuff they learned from the blue zones, and then they went to one town in Minnesota and then convinced the city council, can we institute these things here and see if it makes a difference in sort of the health and wellness of your population? And they did, and it did. They created walking zones and those kind of things where people were forced to connect with each other.
Right.
They're going to the center of the town and you're running into people. And also the idea of love and connection as being so vital to how our internal body works. And you and I know about polyvagal theory and the vagus nerve, which connects the heart directly with the brain. And what we found is that the messages are not going from brain to heart. They're going from heart to brain.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Like the majority of the messages are happening is the heart telling the brain how to view the world. And what's happening, and what's happening if we are having sadness or grief, how it's actually affecting our blood flow.
That's right.
And
anger and frustration even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that mindset, and as a psychologist, I would think this, that mindset is the primary thing for wellness, and it's much more important than even any of the medical things we do are going to be great and a great ancillary kind of connection to that. But if we don't get our head right first, a lot of that's not going to make a difference.
Yeah, I agree. I think that having our head on straight, as our parents used to say, right, is a wise thing that they said to us. And I think that having that right, that's that mindset of wanting to make a lifestyle change, it goes a million miles. And, talking about having the right mindset and positivity, taking care of others, having community, you made a post yesterday that I think your friend Coyote Jackson was talking to you about in a group of people this week. And I'd love to wrap up this session today. I enjoy working with you and talking to you about wellness and longevity, and I want to continue to do that and grow both of our practices in a way that we bring more and more of that in. So thank you for talking about that today, but I want to wrap it up by this amazing post that you made after Coyote Jackson and you had a conversation.
Yeah, it was very interesting because part of as we know, what we focus on expands. And it's like, if our mind is really trapped in fear and we're focusing on that, first of all, we're agitating our body with all the fear hormones.
Yeah.
So we're going to feel worse. So it's like, I always tell people, not only do you get to choose what you think about and focus on, you have to choose what you focus on. Because your default, the negative bias of the brain is always going to default to fear and trying to keep us in protection mode. So one of the things that Coyote has kind of really developed as a part of his Buddhist training is this idea of focusing on loving kindness. Mm-hmm. So, he talked about if you are scared or anxious or angry or even fearful about the future, remember this, practice this. Loving kindness wins. Yeah. It's like Martin Luther King talks about the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We get what we believe. And see, I think that's not just a psychological thing, but I think our brain's perception is really organized around, if you believe certain things, that's what you're going to notice in the environment, even in the midst of a lot of other positive things. So, one of the things we're focusing on for the next couple of months is the idea of loving kindness wins not only ultimately, but also just within ourselves. Am I going to come from this mindset of just being in loving kindness?
I think that's amazing, and it's so timely. I think wherever we are in the world and whatever we stand for in the world, whatever it is, if we focus on loving kindness wins, we're all going to win, and we're all going to feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Gaetano Vaccaro, thank you so much for being here today. I wish we had another hour to do this.
Well, maybe we'll do it again.
Let's maybe create a series of these. I think it would be amazing. And I look forward to talking to you offline and continuing our discussions about wellness and longevity. And thank you for being my personal friend and also my professional colleague. I love working with you and you guys. Dr. Vaccaro is an amazing psychologist in Palm Springs. Dr. Vaccaro, do you have a way for people to reach out to you and ask questions?
Yeah. I have my personal email. I'm happy for people to kind of send me stuff through my email. It's Dr. Gaetano at sbcglobal.net. You have to spell out Dr. D-O-C-T-O-R, Gaetano, G-A-E-T-A-N-O, at sbcglobal.net.
I love it. I think I email that all the time. And if you want to reach J. Flowers Health Institute, it is jflowershealth.com, and all of our contacts are on that website. So, Gaetano, thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful day. I know you're super busy in your life, so thank you for taking the time to do this with me and talk about wellness, longevity, positivity. And I'd love to meet Coyote Jackson next time I'm out.
Absolutely. Next time you're here. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And you guys, this is Understanding the Human Condition with Dr. James Flowers. Thank you so much for watching today and listening, and have a great week. Take care.